Good afternoon, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us. One of the greatest gifts we can give our children is the joy of reading. Idaho Public Television and PBS Kids Share a Story campaign encourage adults to read to children. And today, First Ladies from across the country are taking time to read for Read 2003, a national effort to encourage reading. So now sit back and enjoy some wonderful stories. And please let me introduce today's storyteller, Idaho's First Lady, Patricia Kempthorne.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. That's fine. Today, the first book I'm going to read is called The Quilt Maker's Gift by Jeff Brombo and Gail DeCracken. There was once a quilt maker who kept a house in the blue misty mountains up high. Even the oldest great-great-grandfather could not recall a time when she was not up there sewing day after day. Here and there, and wherever the sun warmed the earth, it was said that she made the prettiest quilts anyone had ever seen. The blues seemed to come from the deepest parts of the ocean, the whites from the northernmost snows, the greens and purples from the abundant wildflowers, the reds, oranges, and pinks from the most wonderful sunsets. Some said there was magic in her fingers. Some whispered that her needles and cloth were gifts of the bewitched. And still others said the quilts really fell to earth from the shoulders of passing angels. Many people climbed her mountain, pockets bursting with gold, hoping to buy one of the wonderful quilts, but the woman would not sell them. "I give my quilts to those who are poor or homeless," she told all who knocked on her door. "They are not for the rich." On the darkest and coldest nights, the woman would make her way down the mountain to the town below. There she would wander the cobblestone streets until she came upon someone sleeping outside in chill. She would then take a newly finished quilt from her bag, wrap it around their shivering shoulders, tuck them in tight, and tiptoe away. Then, the very next morning, with a steaming cup of blackberry tea, she would begin a new quilt. Now, this time there also lived a very powerful and greedy king who liked nothing better than to receive presents. The hundreds of thousands of beautiful gifts he got for Christmas and his birthday were never enough. So a law was passed that the king would celebrate his birthday twice a year. When that still wasn't enough, he ordered his soldiers to search the kingdom for those few people who had not yet given him a gift. Over the years, the king had come to own almost all of the prettiest things in the world. Throughout the castle, from top to bottom, in drawers and on shelves, in boxes and trunks, and closets and sacks, all of the king's countless things were stashed. Things that shimmered and glimmered and glowed. Things whimsical and practical. Things mysterious and magical. So many, many things that the king kept a list of all the lists of the things he owned. And yet, with all these marvelous treasures to enjoy, the king never smiled. He was not happy at all. "Somewhere there must be one beautiful thing that will finally make me happy," he was often heard to say, "and I will have it." One day, a soldier rushed into the market palace with news about a magical quilt maker who lived in the mountains. The king stamped his foot. "And how is it that this person has never given me one of her quilts as a gift?" he demanded. "Oh, she only makes them for the poor, Your Majesty," the soldier replied. "And she will not sell them for any amount of money." "Well, we'll see about that," the king roared. "Bring me a horse and 1,000 soldiers." And they set off in search of the quilt maker. But when they arrived at her house, the quilt maker merely laughed. "My quilts are for the poor and needy, and I can easily see you are neither." "I want one of those quilts," the king demanded. It might be the one thing that will finally make me happy."
Whoa.
The woman thought for a moment. "Make presents of everything you own," she said, "and then I will make a quilt for you. With each gift that you give, I will sew in another piece. When at last all your things are gone, your quilt will be finished." "Give away my wonderful treasures?" cried the king. "I don't give things away, I take them." And with that, he ordered the soldiers to seize the beautiful star quilt from the quilt maker. But when they rushed upon her, she tossed the quilt out the window, and a great gust of wind carried the quilt up, up, and away. The king was now very angry. He marched the woman down through the town and up another mountain, where he had his royal iron makers shape a thick bracket of iron. Then they chained her to a rock in the cave of a sleeping bear. Once more the king asked her for a quilt, and once more she refused. "Very well then," the king replied. "I'll leave you here, and when the bear awakens, I'm sure he will make a very fine breakfast of you." Later, when the bear's eyes opened and he saw the woman in his cave, he stood on his mighty hind legs and gave a roar that rattled her bones. She looked up at him and sadly shook her head. "It's no wonder you're so grouchy," the quilt maker said. "You've nothing but rocks on which to rest your head at night. Bring me an armful of pine needles, and with my shawl I'll make you a great big pillow." And that is what she did. No one had ever been so kind to the bear before, so he broke the iron bracelet and asked her to spend the night. Now, although the king was very good at being greedy, he was very bad at being mean. All that night he could not sleep for thinking about the poor woman in the cave. Oh my, what have I done?" he wailed. So he woke up his soldiers, and they all marched in their pajamas up to the cave to save her. But when they arrived, the king found the quilt maker and the bear having a breakfast of berries and honey. Now the king completely forgot about feeling sorry and became angry all over again. He ordered the royal island makers to build an island, barely big enough for the woman to stand on her tiptoes. "Very well," the king replied. Once again, the king asked her for a quilt, and once again she said no. "Then tonight, when you're too tired to stand and lie down to sleep, you'll drown." The king left her alone on the tiny island. Shortly after he left, the quilt maker saw a sparrow flying across the great lake. A cold, fierce wind was blowing, and it did not look like the poor bird would make it to shore. The quilt maker called to him, and he stopped to rest on her shoulder. The poor, tired sparrow was quivering, so the woman quickly made him a coat from scraps of a purple vest. When he was warmed and the wind had stopped, the bird flew off. But he was very grateful to the quilt maker for what she had done. Soon the sky darkened as the air filled with a huge cloud of sparrows, thousands of wings beating together. They swooped down, lifted the woman in their little beaks, and carried her safely to shore. Again that night, the king could not sleep for thinking about the woman alone on the island. Oh my, what have I done?" he moaned. So he woke up his sleepy soldiers again, and they marched in their pajamas down to the lake to set the woman free. But when they arrived, she was sitting on a tree limb, sewing tiny little purple coats for all the sparrows. "I give up," the king shouted. "What must I do for you to give me a quilt?" "As I said," the woman answered, "give away all of the things you own. I'll sew a quilt for you, and with each gift that you give, I'll add another piece to your quilt." "I can't do that," cried the king. "I love all my wonderful, beautiful things." "But if they don't make you happy," the woman replied, "what good are they?" "That's true," the king sighed, and he thought about what she had said for a long, long time, so long that weeks went by. "Oh, all right," he finally muttered. "If I must give away my treasures, then I must." The king went to his castle and searched from top to bottom for something he could bear to give away. Frowning, he finally came upon a single marble. But the boy who received it smiled so brightly in return, the king went back for more things. Eventually, he brought out a pile of velvet coats and went about the town giving them to people dressed only in rags. All were so pleased that they marched up and down the street in a grand parade. But still, the king did not smile. Next, the king fetched 100 waltzing blue Siamese cats and a dozen fish that were clear as glass. Then the king ordered his merry-go-round with real horses to be brought out. Children cried with delight and cartwheeled around him, and the smallest of smiles began to show on the king's face. The king looked about him and saw the dancing and merrymaking and all the happiness his gifts had brought. A child took hold of his hand and pulled him into the dance. Now the king really smiled and even laughed out loud. "How can this be?" he cried. "How can I feel so happy about giving my things away? Bring everything out. Bring it all out at once." Meanwhile, the quilt maker kept her word and started making a special quilt for the king. With each gift that he gave, she added another piece to his quilt. So the king kept on giving and giving. When at last there was no one left in town who had not received something, the king decided to go out into the world and find others who might be in need of his gifts. But before he left, the king promised the quilt maker he would send a sparrow back to her each and every time he gave anything away. Morning, noon, and night the wagons rolled out of town, each piled high with the king's wonderful things. For years and years, messenger sparrows flew to the quilt maker's windowsill as the king slowly emptied his wagons, trading his treasures for smiles around the world. More. On and on the quilt maker worked, and piece by piece the king's quilt grew more and more beautiful. Finally, one day, a weary sparrow flew into her window and perched on her needle. She knew then and there that it was the last messenger, so she put a final stitch in the quilt and started down the mountain in search of the king. After a long search, she finally found him. The king's royal clothes were now in tatters, and his toes poked out of his boots. Yet his eyes were glittered with joy, and his laugh was wonderful and thunderous. The quilt maker unfolded the king's quilt from her bag. It was so beautiful that the hummingbirds and the butterflies fluttered about. Standing on tiptoe, she tenderly wrapped it around him. "What's this?" cried the king. "As I promised you long ago," the woman said, "when the day came that you yourself were poor, only then would I give you a quilt." The king's great sunny laugh made green apples fall and flowers turn his way. "But I am not poor," he said. "I may look poor, but in truth my heart is full to bursting, filled with memories of all the happiness I have given and received. I'm the richest man I know." "Nevertheless," the quilt maker said, "I made this quilt for you." "Thank you," replied the king. "I'll take it, but only if you'll accept a gift from me. There is one last treasure I have left to give away. All these years I've saved it just for you." And from his rickety, run-down wagon, the king brought out his throne. "It's really quite comfortable," the king said, "and just the thing for long days of sewing." From that day on, the king often came to the quilt maker's house in the clouds. By day, the quilt maker sewed the beautiful quilts she would sell, and at night the king searched out the poor and downhearted, and was never happier than when he was giving something away.
Oh, that's cool.
Isn't that a wonderful story?
Yeah.
And I just love it. It's a wonderful story. The next story we're going to read is a special story written by a dog, and it's called Dear Mrs. LaRue, Letters from Obedience School. It's by Mark Teague. This is a very special story because it's from a dog's point of view. It starts with an article in the newspaper. from the Snort City Register Gazette on September 30th. The headline reads, "Local Dog Enters Obedience School." Ike LaRue. Citing a long list of behavioral problems, Snort City resident Gertrude R. LaRue yesterday enrolled her dog Ike in the Igor Brotweiler Canine Academy. Established in 1953, the academy has a history of dealing with such issues. "I'm at my wit's end," said Mrs. LaRue. "I love Ike, but I'm afraid he's quite spoiled. He steals food right off the kitchen counter, chases the neighbor's cats, howls whenever I'm away, and last week, while I was crossing the street, he pulled me down, tore my best camel's hair coat. I just don't know what else to do." School officials were unavailable for comment. On October 1st, "Dear Mrs. LaRue, how could you do this to me? This is a prison, not a school. You should see the other dogs. They are bad dogs, Mrs. LaRue. I do not fit in. Even the journey here was a horror. I am very unhappy and may need something to chew on when I get home. Please come right away. Sincerely, Ike." On October 2nd, "Dear Mrs. LaRue, were you really so upset about the chicken pie? You know you might have discussed it with me. You could have said, 'Ike, don't eat the chicken pie. I'm saving it for dinner.' Would that have been so difficult? It would have prevented a lot of hard feelings. Needless to say, I am being horribly mistreated. You say I should be patient and accept that I'm here through the term. Are you aware that the term lasts for 2 months? Do you know how long that is in dog years? Sincerely, Ike." "Dear Mrs. LaRue," October 3rd. "I'd like to clear up some misconceptions about the Hibbins cats. First, they are hardly the little angels Mrs. Hibbins makes them out to be. Second, how should I know what they were doing out on the fire escape in the middle of January? They were being a bit melodramatic, don't you think? The way they cried and refused to come down. It's hard to believe that they were really sick for 3 whole days. But you know cats. Your dog, Ike." "Dear Mrs. LaRue," October 4th. "You should see what goes on around here. The way my warden, Miss Klondike, barks orders is shocking. Day after day, I'm forced to perform the most meaningless tasks. Today it was sit and roll over all day long. I flatly refuse to roll over. It's ridiculous, and I won't do it. Of course, I was severely punished. And another thing, who will help you cross the street while I'm away? You know you have a bad habit of not looking both ways. Think of all the times I've saved you. Well, there was the one time anyway. I must say you weren't very grateful, complaining on and on about the tiny rip in your ratty old coat. But the point is, you need me. Yours, Ike." "Dear Mrs. LaRue," October 5th. "The guards here are all caught up in this good dog, bad dog thing. I hear it constantly. Good dog, Ike. Don't be a bad dog, Ike. Is it really so good to sit still like a lummox all day? Nevertheless, I refuse to be broken. Miss Klondike has taken my typewriter. She claims it disturbs the other dogs. Does anybody care that the other dogs disturb me? Yours, Ike." "Dear Mrs. LaRue," October 6th. "Were the neighbors really complaining about my howling? It is hard to imagine. First, I didn't howl that much. You were away those nights, so you wouldn't know, but trust me, it was quite moderate. Second, let's recall that these are the same neighbors who are constantly waking me up in the middle of the afternoon with their loud vacuuming. I say we all have to learn to get along. Life here continues to be a nightmare. You wouldn't believe what goes on in the cafeteria. Sincerely, Ike. P.S. Now, I don't want to alarm you, but the thought of escape has occurred to me." "Dear Mrs. LaRue," October 7th. "I hate to tell you this, but I am terribly ill. It started in my paw, causing me to limp all day. Later I felt queasy so that I could barely eat dinner, except for the yummy gravy. Then I began to moan and howl. Finally, I had to be taken to the vet. Dr. Wilfrey claims that he can't find anything wrong with me, but I'm certain I have an awful disease. I must come home at once. Honestly yours, Ike. Dear Mrs. LaRue, October 8th. Thank you for the lovely get well card. Still, I'm a little surprised that you didn't come to get me. I know what Dr. Wilfrey says, but is it really wise to take risks with one's health? I could have a relapse, you know. With fall here, I think about all the fine times we used to have in the park. Remember how sometimes you would bring along a tennis ball? You would throw it and I would retrieve it every time. Except for once when it landed in something nasty and I brought you back a stick instead. Ah, how I miss those days. Yours truly, Ike. P.S. Imagine how awful it is for me to be stuck inside my tiny cell. P.P.S. I still feel pretty sick. Dear Mrs. LaRue, October 9th. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I have decided to attempt a daring escape. I am sorry it has come to this, since I am really a very good dog, but frankly, you left me no choice. How sad it is not to be appreciated. From now on, I'll wander from town to town without a home, or even any dog food, most likely. Such is the life of a desperate outlaw. I will try to write to you from time to time as I carry on my life of hardship and danger. Your lonely fugitive, Ike. Then, in the Snort City Register Gazette on October 10th, the headline reads, LaRue escapes doggy detention. Former Snort City resident Ike LaRue escaped last night from the dormitory at the Igor Brotweiler Canine Academy. The dog is described as toothy by local police, and his current whereabouts are unknown. To be honest, I thought he was bluffing when he told me he was planning to escape, said a visibly upset Gertrude R. LaRue, the dog's owner. Ike tends to be a bit melodramatic, you know. Now I can only pray that he'll come back. Asked if she would return Ike to Brotweiler Academy, Mrs. LaRue said that she would have to wait and see. He's a good dog, basically, but we'll have to wait and see. Dear Mrs. LaRue, October 11th, somewhere in America. I continue to suffer horribly as I roam this barren wasteland. Who knows where my wanderings will take me now? Hopefully to some place with yummy food. Remember the special treats you used to make for me? I miss them. I miss our nice comfy apartment, but mostly I miss you. Your sad dog, Ike. P.S. I even miss the Hibbins cats in a way. Dear Mrs. LaRue, October 12th, still somewhere. The world is a hard and cruel place for a stray dog. You would scarcely believe the misery I've endured. So I have decided to return home. You may try to lock me up again, but that is a risk I must take. And frankly, even more than myself, I worry about you. You may not know it, Mrs. LaRue, but you need a dog. Your misunderstood friend, Ike. And then, in the Snort City Register Gazette on October 13th, the headline reads, Hero Dog Saves Owner. Ike LaRue, until recently a student of the Igor Brotweiler Canine Academy, returned to Snort City yesterday in dramatic fashion. In fact, he arrived just in time to rescue his owner, Gertrude R. LaRue of 2nd Avenue, from an oncoming truck. Mrs. LaRue had made the trip downtown to purchase a new camel's hair coat. Apparently, she neglected to look both ways before stepping into traffic. The daring rescue was witnessed by several onlookers, including Patrolman Newton Smitzer. He rolled right out across 2 lanes of traffic to get at her, said Smitzer. It was really something. I haven't seen rolling like that since I left the police academy. Mrs. LaRue was unhurt in the incident, though her coat was badly torn. I don't care about that, she said. I'm just happy to have my Ike back home where he belongs. LaRue said he plans to throw a big party for the dog. All the neighbors will be there, and I'm going to serve all of Ike's favorite dishes. I'll bet he can't wait to taste the chicken pie. He's going to love it. That's a great book.
He loves the chicken
He
pie.
loves it. Absolutely. That's just great. The third book we're going to read today is called Wings by Christopher Meyer. And I'm just going to read it because the pictures are harder to show. So I'm going to try to read it and think of it in the word story from the words and the word pictures. Look at that strange boy. Everyone from the neighborhood is pointing fingers and watching the sky. How's he doing that? They stretch their necks and shake their heads. Icarus Jackson, a new boy on my block, is flying above the rooftops. He is swooping and diving and looping past people's windows over the crowd. I don't think he's strange. Icarus Jackson, the flyboy, came to my school last Thursday. His long, strong, proud wings followed wherever he went. The whole school was staring eyes and wagging tongues. They whispered about his wings and his hair and his shoes, like they whisper about how quiet I am. Our teacher complained that the other kids couldn't help but gawk and stare. He said that Icarus' wings blocked the blackboard and made it hard for students to pay attention. The teacher told Icarus to leave class until he could figure out what to do with his wings. He left the room quietly, dragging his feathers behind him. One boy snickered. At recess, the snicker grew into a giggle and spread across the playground. Soon all the kids were laughing at Icarus Jackson's useless wings. I thought that if he flew just once, everyone would stop laughing. Icarus looked up, flapped his wings a couple of times, and then jumped into the air. He swept through the schoolyard like slow motion, instant replay. But the other kids were not impressed. One girl grabbed the basketball. The boy stuffed the handball in his pocket. Someone nagged. Nobody likes a show-off. Their words sent Icarus drifting into the sky away from glaring eyes and pointing fingers. I waited for them to point back at me as I watched Icarus float farther and farther away. Walking home from school, I knew how he felt, how lonely he must be. Maybe I should have said something to those mean kids. I ran through the streets with my eyes to the sky, searching clouds for Icarus. He struggled to stay in the air. His wings drooped and his head hung low. He landed heavily on the edge of a building and sat with the pigeons. Pigeons don't make fun of people. A policeman passing by blew his whistle. You with the wings, come down from there. Stay yourself on the ground. You'll get in trouble. You'll get hurt. Seemed to me Icarus was already in trouble and hurt. Could the policeman put him in jail for flying, for being different? When the neighborhood kids saw the policeman yelling at him, they exploded with laughter. Icarus dropped to the ground. Stop, I cried. Leave him alone. And they did. I called to Icarus, and he sailed closer to me. I told him what
I'm sorry we've run out of time for today, but Mrs. Kempthorne is going to continue reading to the Basin second grade and third graders here in the studio, and we hope that you'll take time today to read. Thanks for tuning in.